Hello and welcome to today's webinar, 10 Steps to Writing and Publishing Your Family History. My name is Ginevra Morse. I am the Chief Learning and Interpretation Officer here at American Ancestors. I will be your moderator for this session. This program is brought to you by the Brew Family Learning Center. American Ancestors is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history and are pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. Giving today's presentation is Sharon Inglis, Vice President of Publishing at American Ancestors. She came to American Ancestors 9 years ago with over 30 years of experience in educational textbook publishing. Sharon oversees all steps of the research, writing, and production of up to 20 books a year, as well as the publication of our scholarly journals, the New England Historical and Genealogical Register, and the Mayflower Descendant. Sharon will go over the 10 basic steps for writing and publishing your family history. She'll also list some go-to resources that are sure to help you along the way. At any point during the presentation, feel free to type your question into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. We'll address as many questions as we can in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the hour. There is an optional syllabus available for purchase if you are interested. Your purchase helps support us in making these free webinars. And I will include that link in just a moment, and a link to that syllabus will also be available in our follow-up email. This presentation is also being recorded and will be freely available on our website and YouTube channel. We have a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Take it away, Sharon.
Thanks, Ginevra. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. At American Ancestors, we have a long tradition of publishing that dates back to 1847, 2 years after we were founded, when we published the first issue of our quarterly journal, the New England Historical and Genealogical Register. It was in that journal, back in 1870, that we introduced a standardized way to present genealogical information known as register style, which I will discuss in a little bit. In our library, we have thousands of family histories of all kinds. We began publishing books the same year we started publishing the register, and our book publishing program today includes how-to books for family historians, study projects and record compilations, books about art and culture even, and under our New Street Press imprint, new genealogical scholarship. One thing to note, as I talk about publishing today, I'm going to use the term book, but you could just as easily be sharing your family story in a journal article or on a website or in another electronic format. Many of the steps I'm about to cover are the same no matter what you are writing, so please don't be scared off by the term book. Excuse me. The most common things we hear from people who want to publish their family history are, how can I make my family history more readable? I don't want it to be just a list of names and dates. I want my grandchildren to actually read what I write. There are certain key elements that make a family history book engaging. Besides the very important vital info, birth, death, marriage, children, including information about what was happening at the time and in the place where your ancestors lived, will help readers understand the lives of these people who came before them. Photos, charts, maps, and other illustrations will help to really bring their stories to life, especially for those young readers. Finally, clear and focused writing will make it easier for everyone to learn from what you write. Remember that of the publications you've used in your research, whether it be old books at historical societies, books that have been passed down in your family, or books that have been digitized on archive.org or Google Books, every one of them exists because someone thought it was important to share their knowledge with others. We want you to be that person, and we want to help you do it. After all, probably no one right now knows your family story like you do. Now let's look at the 10 steps. These are the basic steps for writing and publishing your family history. We'll tackle them in the 3 groups seen here in red, and I'll go over the tasks involved in each step in detail, as much detail as time allows at least. You can see that the planning stage is an important one because it takes up half the steps. Every successful project has a plan. and writing and publishing your family history is no exception. As we begin, think ahead to 100 years down the line to when someone really wants to know about precisely the thing you've been researching. How can you best impart this information to them? First step, switch mental gears. This is a slide I use in the 5-week course we do on writing and publishing. Picture yourself here, right next to that coffee mug. You're here because you're ready or close to being ready to stop thinking about your family history as an open ended research project and to start writing. It's time to hang up your researcher hat and assess what you have: notes, files, photos, documents. Make it into something shareable. If possible, I suggest you set up an area where you can work and not have to put all your stuff away. The table your family eats at each evening is not the best place for you to tackle this project. And shifting gears doesn't mean that you'll never log into American Ancestors or Family Search again. You may identify gaps you need to fill during the process of writing, or find you want to double check something that you're unsure of before you move on. That's okay. Your goal is to share with others what you have learned about your family up to this point. Step 2, determine your audience and time frame. To do this, you need to consider two things. First, your audience. Who are you writing for? For most people we encounter, their family is their audience. They want their children and grandchildren to know their family history. Or maybe they are the family genealogist and they want to create something for an upcoming reunion or wedding or special anniversary or birthday. If you've solved an important question about an ancestor that has stumped other researchers and you want to share your findings in a journal article, an article such as this will be valuable to both your family and to the wider genealogical community. The next consideration is time frame. When is the family event? Or when is the submission date for the journal? Find out from the editor when that is. Even if there isn't a drop dead done date, setting a deadline for yourself will help you stay motivated. Consider your other commitments and allow yourself more time than you think you'll need. The size or scope of what you are doing has to fit into the time you have available. If you realize that you're not going to have enough time, you may have to shrink the scope or get help. More on that later. As you think about your audience and the schedule, the scope of your work will begin to take shape. Before we move on to the next step, here's a suggestion. Come visit our American Ancestors Library once we open our beautiful new building, or browse the Family History Genealogy section at your local public library. You'll see a variety of models that you could use to share your research in print. Memoirs are one type of family history book that are presented mostly as narrative. It's not organized into a standard genealogical format. Transcribed diaries or letters with genealogical annotations also fall into the family history category. Even a book of family recipes with biographical information about each cook is a way to share genealogy. What about the books you see that you like will work with your audience and the content you want to present? Will you be able to accomplish something similar within your time frame? You might not find a perfect fit, but you may have an aha moment that makes you say, hey, I can do that. Sorry, scratchy throat. Let's look at 3 common print formats used for family histories. I'm not going to talk about photo books or calendars here since those are self-explanatory. However, both of those can become mini writing projects too if you include information from your research as the photo captions. So first look at the example on the left. For a reunion or a special relative, printing pages at home on regular 8.5 by 11 letter size paper and binding them with a ribbon or putting them in a binder is an easy, inexpensive, low-tech way to share your research with others. Remember, the goal is to share. It doesn't have to be elaborate. If you have more time, money, and energy, you can choose to create a more permanent paperback or hardcover volume. Keep in mind that a paperback is less expensive than a hardcover. And the cost also depends on what size the pages are. We call that the trim size, and how many pages there are in the finished book. Maybe you're not going to print your publication at all. You can save it as a PDF, share it electronically with others. But it will still need to be organized like a book in order for family members and other genealogists to be able to benefit from your work. Keep in mind that a booklet or binder can be shared with libraries and historical associations just as a book can. It's not the package, it's the research inside. Okay, now you know the audience and the time frame and have some models to follow. It's time to think about the genealogical format you'll use to present your research. There are two standard formats: descendancy format, also known as register style, and Ahnentafel format, a word that means ancestor table in German. The first format gets its name, register style, from our journal, the Register. It's also called descendancy format because it starts in the past and traces the descendants of that person to the present, including all their children. Living family members will be found at the end of a book that's done in register style. As I said, Ahnentafel means ancestor table. It traces the ancestors of one person. And Ahnentafel starts in the present with that person and goes back in the past to give every known ancestor of that person by listing the parents as couples. The living family member will be person number one at the beginning of an Ahnentafel. The children of the pairs are not usually included, but can be added if you like. Keep in mind that all register style and Ahnentafel genealogies include some amount of narrative text. After all, a person is not just their birth, death, and marriage dates. Every ancestor has a story that deserves to be told. The first format, descendancy format or register style, is probably the most common because it has proved to be a clear and highly efficient way to organize and present genealogical information in writing. In descendancy format, you begin in the past, often but not always with the immigrant to America, and move toward or to the present, tracing some or all of the descendants of one person. The backbone of this system is the family group, with key people given identification numbers and with the inclusion of as much vital data as possible for each person. Although you can trace all the descendants of one common ancestor, you can also trace multiple lines in this way. Because you're coming down from a common ancestor, you treat all children of that ancestor and all the children's offspring, meaning there will be lots of aunts and uncles and cousins. As I said, the backbone of the register system is the family group, meaning the couple and any children they had. In register style, you give each descendant you plan to discuss in your publication an identification number. Here we see a family group. We start with Henry Morgan in orange, the person who has Arabic numeral 1 as his ID number in the first line of the text. In the first paragraph, we see Henry's spouse, Winifred. Her name is in bold text like his. Their full names and vital statistics are included, including places and dates. The second paragraph, in green, gives some additional information about the couple. You might not know anything, or you might know quite a bit. We'll talk about this narrative text more later. At the end of Henry and Winifred's couple sketch, we present in blue a Roman numeraled list of their children, each with their full names and vital statistics. Any child who will be treated in a couple sketch of their own later in the publication, we call this being carried forward, gets an ID number. You can see these, numbers 2 through 7, at the far left of the page. Typically, only a child who later has their own offspring will be carried forward. These numbers will continue consecutively throughout the treatment of the family. Did you notice that Benjamin Franklin Morgan, child number 4, is not assigned an ID number? This is because he died young, before having children and will not be covered in his own family group later. He has more information than his siblings here because this is the only place we will see Benjamin. The people who are carried forward only get their birth and marriage info included in the childless because all the other detail will come later in their own couple sketch. Unlike register style, an Onontoffel goes backward in time from present to past to identify all known ancestors of one person. Since the focus of an Onontoffel is the direct line, you would typically not include siblings. Like register style, an Onontoffel also supplies the basic data about people, but the people are arranged in a different order. It's as if you were to take a multi-generational or pedigree chart and turn it sideways. An Onontoffel has a very precise numbering system that your readers have to understand in order to benefit fully from this format. Here is how the numbering in an Onontoffel works. Subject, let's say that's you, is number 1. Your father's number 2, your mother number 3. Paternal grandparents are 4 and 5. Your maternal grandparents are 6 and 7, and so on, all the way back in time, as far as it's possible to research anyway. Soon as the numbers can get into the thousands. Notice that in every father-mother pair, the father has an even number and the mother has an odd number. You can find the line of descent in an Onontoffel mathematically. Double the person's number to get the father's number. The mother's number is the father's number plus 1. Conversely, to find a person's child, you divide the father's number by 2. Here's what an ancestor table looks like in print. On this page, look at father-mother pair of John Chipman, number 3950, and his lovely wife, Hope Howland, number 3951. We know quite a bit about them, so there's a lengthy paragraph of narrative. What we do not see is a list of any children they had together. But we know they had at least one child because they are included in this ancestry. But to find out who that child is, you have to divide 3950 by 2. Then go look at person number 1975, who will be earlier in the publication because we start with 1, remember? You can see that the couples above and below John and Hope are from different families, Huckins and Green. This is the disadvantage of an Onontoffel. While it's a great format for listing all ancestors, the parents and their children could be separated by many pages as the generations expand. Readers will have to do the calculation I just did to find the direct line. The fact that family groups aren't presented together can make it difficult for some non-genealogists to follow. Again, consider your audience. Will they be able to understand and use a publication that is in Onontoffel format? Even when real-life situations arise that complicate a family structure, or when you are having trouble figuring out how to number a tangled web of ancestors who intermarried, remember that the format is your friend. The big picture here is that the format rules are really a guideline, for how to write. You enter this, followed by that, then you put that entry here and number it like this. The format's structure gives you flexibility. You can write in whatever order you'd like. You could start with generation 5 because that's the one you know best and write about everyone in that generation, then skip over to another generation when you're done. Or you could trace one branch of the family through all the generations before moving on to the next. Just as you may move around in your writing, keep in mind that a reader may do the same, heading first to the people they are related to. The format will help them understand how everything is organized too. Step 4 is determining what you want to cover in your book. That is the scope of your work. Ask yourself, do you want to write about just one particularly interesting or important ancestor? Or will you cover just your mother's side of the family or just your father's side? Do you want to treat a single line of descent or all descendants of a common ancestor? You could choose to treat descendants of the immigrant ancestor with just one surname, but not all descendants. This book could be titled Some Descendants of Ancestor X. Or maybe you've been researching for 40 years and are fired up and ready to take on the huge job of writing about both your maternal and paternal lines. How many generations do you include? If you plan to include living descendants, you will have to contact them to get their vital details since they may not yet be available in public records. It's also polite and smart to get their buy in before including them in anything that you intend to publish. Once you've determined what your work will cover, you may want to come up with a working title for your book. This will help solidify your ideas and make your project feel real. Now, do what we all learned about in school, make an outline. Your outline is basically the table of contents, or we're going to call it the TOC for your book. A TOC will force you not only to decide what to include, but also what to leave out. Regarding scope, my advice would be to start small, particularly if writing family history is a new pursuit for you. Taking on too much at once can be overwhelming. Choose a single line or a small number of generations, something you know you can accomplish without becoming discouraged and potentially abandoning the project. Keeping your project manageable will ensure that you don't get so overwhelmed that you give up. Having a title and a table of contents provides boundaries for you to work within. Let's look at a few examples of table of contents. Your TOC might be as simple as this one for our Lowell genealogy. This is a long and complex 600-page book, but you can see how straightforward the table of contents is. Is a chapter on the family in England, followed by chapters on each subsequent generation. TOC shows that the book begins with the family prior to their immigration to America and then covers 14 generations thereafter. We're clearly starting with the immigrant, and the number of generations tells us how far we're going. 14 means we're coming to or near the present time. There will be some living family members covered in the book. The book's title tells us that its content is very specific, descendants of one particular man who lived in Newburyport, Mass. In the second example, we see that the author has documented 5 different families in 5 sections. The first 4 are the ancestors of Harold Morgan and his wife, Elsie Whipple. The 5th is the author's allied Seligman family, allied meaning a family that married into one of the 4 main families. The appendix for this book gives details about something that was very important to this author, family members who served in the military in nearly every American conflict. This book is shorter, 460 pages. Here again, the title and subtitle tell us exactly what we're getting, not only ancestors, but also descendants of this one couple. The importance of creating a TOC now is that it serves as a benchmark to refer to as you work. It will help to keep you focused on the task at hand. It's possible, however, that you'll discover a different angle to the story that wants to be told. It's okay to listen to those instincts and revise your table of contents slightly to accommodate small detours. Likewise, if something that you included in your TOC doesn't seem to fit, maybe it doesn't belong. Don't spend too much time trying to make it work. Put it aside for now anyway. You can always write about it separately later, or it may lend itself to being a sidebar, a related but separate piece, like you sometimes see as part of a larger magazine article. And an out of sync topic, an out of sync topic, or one that is common to many of the book's chapters, could also become an appendix, like the military service list in this Morgan book. Okay, this is you once you've organized your materials. You're going to turn the wealth of materials your research has produced into something publishable. Your findings, once they are written up in a Word document, will become a manuscript, which will in turn become your book. Step 5 is organizing your research so that you can begin writing. If you're like most genealogists, you've got variety of stuff on paper and as digital files. Take your time here, especially if you have done many years of research. Rushing the organizing phase could cause you to overlook something important and make for extra work and headaches later on. Remember, if your materials are organized, it will help your mind stay organized as you write. It's okay to have some hard copy and some electronic materials because I'm going to show you how to organize both using your table of contents as a guide. This is where your table of contents goes to work for you. Let's do hard copies first. On the left is the TOC for a book we recently published that had been in the works for such a long time that we had lots of paper files. The project was 8 register-style chapters covering the 4 paternal and 4 maternal families of one couple. This book is 750 pages long. The folders at the right represent how we use the structure of the TOC to create a set of manila folders. In this case, they were more like boxes, one for each family. We sorted all the papers into these containers so that those materials are organized by the chapters of the book. Now, the electronic files. Here's a set of identical folders that contain our digital materials, also sorted by generation based on the table of contents. The folders at the top pertain to the project in general. Within the chapter folders, we further organize materials by person, perhaps chronologically, thematically, or by record type, etc. Do whatever works for the way you think and write. File naming is very important with electronic files. We'll discuss this when we get to the next slide. When the genealogist sat down to write, she had the box for the certain family open next to her and the same folder open on her computer. All her materials easily accessible so she can follow the golden rule of genealogy. Cite as you write. If she can't find something she needs in the paper files or the electronic files, she will know that she missed a piece of information in her research. She can then go online to get it or make a note in her manuscript file and plan a trip to the library to look for it. Probably the most useful file naming convention for genealogists is to begin the file name with the person's ID number. The files on the left were images for an Anantafel we did, in which Betty was person number 3. Be sure to include enough zeros so that the files will sort in order, even if you were doing an Anantafel that may end up including ID numbers in the thousands. That's why there's so many zeros with Betty. Careful file naming is also a way to differentiate people who may have the same name. There could be a John Chipman number 3950 and his son, John Chipman number 1975. Starting the names of document files associated with each man with their person number will ensure that the generations don't get mixed up. If you have dated record like those on the right, those happen to be invoices, but name them with the year first, then the month and day to help you sort them. Okay, we've made it through the planning steps, and that was a big chunk of what our steps are. We are now at the heart of the matter, the actual writing. You may want to set aside time every day or a day every week to work in your project. If you aren't feeling up to writing on a given day, try switching to the more mechanical task of plugging in the vital genealogical data in the sketch for each person you'll cover. That way you still feel like you're making progress. If you find yourself at a point of confusion or aggravation, just leave your desk, go take a walk. I mentioned earlier that having a dedicated place for your writing will also be helpful. Okay, we're there. Step 6, write and cite. Your word processing software is probably the most important tool you have to get this writing project done. There are many programs to choose from. I encourage you to use whatever you're comfortable with. For the purpose of this lecture, I am going to assume you'll be using Microsoft Word. I say this because Word has features that are great for writing genealogical content in register or on-TOEFL style. The biggest plus is that you can get a register template or an on-TOEFL template in Word from our website that will automate much of the work of creating your manuscript. Another huge advantage is Word's ability to do genealogical numbering in a register style document. No other program will do that. It takes a lot of pressure off you so you can focus on being accurate and creative in your writing. Word also has track changes tool, which other programs also have. That will allow you to see the changes you make in your document. Most important with genealogical writing is something I'm sure you've heard, because I think I've said it at least once, cite as you write. You do not want to have to go back and fill in your sources later unless it's absolutely unavoidable. Good source citations are required in order to allow other genealogists to recreate the research you did. Here's what our register style template looks like. Text styles, that is, indents, appropriate type sizes, and styles like small caps, bold, ital, are built right into the Word file. The arrow shows where I've pulled down the Styles menu to show you the list of available options for adding genealogical text for the main person, children, even grandchildren. Not having to manually apply the correct style to the names is a huge time saver. This next example shows you the genealogical numbering in our registered template. Each main person has an Arabic numeral as an identifier. The arrow here points to Sir Richard Saltonstall, person number 1. In the list, Sir Richard and Lady Saltonstall's children. Let me start that again. In the list of Sir Richard and Lady Saltonstall's children, the number 2 circled in red next to the name of their first child, also named Richard, tells you that Richard the son will be carried forward, meaning talked about in detail in his own main entry sketch later in the book. Richard the son's own sketch as person number 2, the blue circle in the second little page there, may fall many pages later in your manuscript. It's extremely difficult to track those numbers and adjust them manually if you ever need to add or remove people in your file. A single genealogical numbering error that goes unnoticed can create hundreds of corrections in a big project. I know firsthand, been there. This auto numbering feature of MS Word may save your sanity and your project. As soon as you begin writing, create what's called an editorial style sheet. Style sheet is a list of words that will likely appear more than once in your book. It's a way for you to maintain consistency in the spelling, hyphenation, and capitalization of these items. It may seem nitpicky to worry about such details, but the more consistent your writing is, the easier it will be for your readers to understand, enjoy, and benefit from what you've written. Let's talk about what goes in a style sheet. Your list should include items that can have varied spellings. Names, places, organizations, even job titles. Sort them in alpha order so when you're writing you can quickly find the term you're looking for to see what style you decided on for it. You don't have to list every word, just the ones that are tricky and that you think you'll be using over and over. If you're unsure of whether you'll use a word again, it's best to err on the side of caution and include it in your style sheet. We don't have time to go over all these examples here, but our guide to genealogical writing and our editorial style sheet portable genealogist quick reference guide cover this in detail. The register and on-TOEFL templates we just talked about are designed to guide you through entering data in a consistent way. We always give the data in the same order because, again, consistency helps your reader. Here's an example of the first paragraph of a genealogical sketch. We have the subject's name, where he was born, where he died, and when. These are the bookends of Frank's life. Then we move to his marriage with the place, date, and spouse's name. We can already see a story here with just this little bit of information. He was born in Italy, died in Florida. He was buried in New Jersey and married in Louisiana. How and why did he move from place to place? That is the story that we want to tell in the narrative paragraphs that will follow this first paragraph of Frank's sketch. The narrative is the story that you will add after you give the vital genealogical born, died, married facts. Think of the narrative as the life a person lived that's represented by the dash between their birth and death dates. These dates here are my dad's birth and death dates, and I put him there because today is his birthday. His life story is what happened between those dates. Narrative comes from a variety of sources, both published and unpublished. Census data, city directories, ship registers, immigration records, wills and probate, obituaries, diaries, letters, interviews, all of these tell the person's story. If you don't have any specific stories about an ancestor in your genealogy, consult historical sources to provide context for where and when they lived. We'll look at how to do that in a minute. Once you've gathered some key resources, just start typing. Get what you have onto the page. You can organize it more later. In general, it makes sense to enter biographical narrative chronologically. You can think of it as telling the story of a person's life, beginning, middle, and an end. Perhaps how that impacted the family going forward, how the person's death impacted the family going forward. To get from the beginning to the end, you need to tell the story. Alternately, you could write thematically. In some cases where there's a wealth of information, it may be easier to have a paragraph discussing the person's career and then a separate paragraph detailing his land transactions, even if the events within the two paragraphs are happening simultaneously. In this case, I recommend making good use of subheads to differentiate the topics covered in each section. However you choose to organize your narrative, only discuss one topic per paragraph. And if it starts to get too long, break it into multiple paragraphs. This is where the headings come into play. And here it is, the tip: cite as you write. Never put off adding citations or for the sources you consulted to get your information. You can add your source footnotes at the end of each fact, at the end of a sentence, or at the end of a paragraph. You can choose where to place your source citations, but you must include a source for every piece of information. We don't have time to go over it here, but using a consistent style in your footnotes is as important as using a consistent style in your writing. Our Guide to Genealogical Writing and Reference Notes Portable Genealogist cover this in detail. For each person, ask yourself, who are they? For a couple, who are they together? The question of who is essentially what narrative aims to answer. You want to give your reader a sense of the person and how they connect to other family members and the outside world. To do so, write about the kinds of things that make up a person's life between those bookends of when they were born and when they died. Include details about their education, occupation, military service, public service, where they lived, their religious affiliations, club memberships, and personal details if you have them. All this information shows the kind of person your subject was. The highlighted portions here reveal lots of information about Dr. Nathaniel Saltonstall right on the first page of his sketch. Where do we get biographical information? Much of it is in the materials we've already gathered in our research, published and unpublished sources. Just finding the record is not enough. It's your job to analyze and relay the information from the record to your readers. You wouldn't just use a census record to write, the Campbell family was listed in the 1910 federal census for Brooklyn, New York. Instead, you would see from the census record that the family lived in Brooklyn, and you would compare that to previous censuses when they'd been living in Manhattan. You would also note that John Campbell was listed as a shoemaker and that he was out of work for 10 weeks coming into that year. This is how you weave the information from the records into a narrative. You can also interview relatives, ask permission if you want to record them, have the relatives fill out questionnaires to gather family stories and memories. Going back to Frank Tormina, we want to add detail that begin to tell his life story. We learn from parish records when he was born, and a passenger list gives the name of the ship he took to New York. Family stories, supported by newspaper articles, tell about the other family members and the family business. Frank's story is already beginning to take shape. We've just added some biographical detail about Frank, but depending on the scope of your project and the time you have available, you may want to add a wider view of his life in the form of historical context. What social, political, economic, and geographic currents might have shaped his life? What was happening around Frank when and where he lived? What you need to keep in mind, however, is that you should only add historical context that will supplement and support your primary story. Include only what is of interest. Omit any information that the reader can easily find in other sources. For instance, if an ancestor, not Frank, fought in the Revolutionary War, you don't need to explain why the war was fought. Readers likely know that information, or they can find it online. Providing historical context allows your readers to better understand what factors affected these people and how they in turn had an impact on the world around them. These are the kinds of information you could include. History, beliefs and practices, what motivated that person's actions and reactions. Geography, where something happened is just as important as when. Did the weather and topography affect the lives of your ancestor? Descriptions, what I mean by this is that you can paint a picture with words. What your ancestor was seeing and experiencing during the events of an era. Think influenza epidemic of 1918, the Dust Bowl, the civil rights unrest of the 1960s. Where to find historical narrative to add to your project. Histories can be local histories. There are timelines that are published online. Maps and gazetteers are great for finding out about important places where your ancestor lived. Regarding particular subject areas, you could look at Harvard College class books to see what Dr. Saltonstall's education was like in the 1760s. Local newspapers are another great source. For all of the above, published and unpublished, it's always worthwhile to run a general internet search. Be sure to cite your sources for whatever information you get from someone else's work if you're going to use it in your work. Let's return to the life of Frank Tormina to add some richer, wider context. Some online searching revealed that by the 20s, when he arrived, Italian immigration was starting to slow. Don't you wonder why Frank and his cousins went to New Orleans? A peek at New Orleans history and tourism websites shows that it was a very popular destination for Sicilians. So many opened corner grocery stores that the French Quarter became known as Little Palermo. Now that's an interesting piece of information to add to your work. Here's something a little drier than that, genealogical numbering. It's so important. If you came upon something in your research that caused you to have to add or remove a person, make sure to check your child list and main sketch numbering early and often. Where are you going to place these interesting narrative portions? Most often in our books, we include details about a person's life story in the narrative paragraphs that follow the first paragraph. Sometimes we might see an overarching theme that crosses several generations or several families. Maybe it's patriotism or religion or a certain trade that many of the men were involved in. For this reason, we want to explore it in more depth. We will usually treat these topics in an all-narrative chapter that serves as an introduction before the genealogical chapters. There may be other topics connected to just one person or family. Sometimes we want these to look different because we think they might appeal to those young readers. In this case, we pull that narrative out into a separate feature, sidebar, or boxed insert like you would see in a magazine article. Finally, we make use of appendices for added content that supports or extends the narrative. This is often primary source transcriptions such as diaries or interviews. Let's quickly, because I'm running out of time, look at some examples of how narrative can be presented in a publication. This book is a registered style genealogy that covers ancestors and descendants. It has lengthy narrative and photos incorporated throughout. Here is an example of how we decided to include a photo and an excerpt from the diary of one individual, what we refer to as a feature or sidebar or boxed insert, right inside their genealogical sketch. This is the same book, showing the beginning of one chapter. It has a short narrative introduction before the genealogical sketch begins. Then we see an early image of the immigrant. We found that in an 1893 published book. The boxed insert on the right focuses on some of the key ancestors in this line with a common thread. 3 were also ministers. This example is a much shorter book that focuses on a small family who immigrated from Ireland in the late 1800s. The table of contents tells you that both chapters in part 1 about their life in Ireland. Part 2 contains 2 chapters that covers their settlement to Connecticut, but also a third chapter about the importance of education in the family. This was such an important theme, we decided to devote an entire chapter to it. The first 5 chapters are completely narrative, no genealogical sketches at all. Part 3 of the book is where we find the registered style genealogy of 5 generations of the family. Second appendix is a transcript of a conversation among 5 living siblings. We had intended to interview them just to gather stories to put into the genealogy, but when we listened to the recording, the stories were so compelling and we got such a rich sense of their tight-knit relationship, we decided to include large excerpts from the transcript itself, and this was a huge hit with the family. When you have known connections that are already documented, you can simply create a drop chart like this and cite the source rather than duplicate all of that research in text form. Okay, here we are at step 7. This is when we get into editing. I'm going to have to do it quickly. You've got a draft manuscript. Now you need to read it and refine it at least once, preferably twice. Let's look at why you need to edit your work. You should always use a spell checker, but it's not only spelling you want to check. As we said, genealogical content is complicated, and the numbering is so important. That needs to be checked. When should you edit? Once you have a solid draft of 2 or 3 chapters, do some self-editing to see what kinds of things are tripping you up. Look from one chapter to another to see if you've been consistent in your style and organization. Always add to your style sheet as you go. Lastly, who should edit your manuscript? Although self-editing is important, if you end up working with a publishing vendor or submitting an article to a journal, someone else will edit your work. It's still important for you to check and revise what you've written before you submit. You can hire a professional editor. There's a website called the Editorial Freelancers Association where you can find an editor who works with the kind of content that you're writing. When you're reviewing your own work, you may want to read it out loud to yourself, to a spouse, or even to a pet. You can also print hard copies, mark changes with a good old-fashioned red pencil. If you know someone who is the type to point out mistakes in restaurant menus, maybe ask them to read or comment on your work. Send them the file, ask them to use track changes or Google Docs so you can see their suggestions and comments. My advice would be stop writing and editing yourself while this other reader is working. Give yourself a break, and also you don't want to have a hard time knowing where they've made changes if you were also in the document making changes at the same time. The most important thing in a family history publication is, of course, the genealogical content. There's also a story to be told, but it hangs on that framework of the genealogy. There are many, many facts to check and cross-check. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to let you look at this slide and I'm going to move on to the next one. It should be clear by now that just one editing pass is not enough. And now that you've got your manuscript all reviewed and edited as many times as you can manage, this is when you're going to put everything together. Right on to the next slide. This is where you're going to add images and layout pages, step 8. This really is made up of 6 sub-steps, which is kind of scary, but they're very technical sub-steps, and this might be where you want to get someone else to help you. How much help you'll need would depend on how fancy you want your book to be and your comfort level with technology. Selecting illustrations is something that you can and maybe should do yourself, since you probably have a lot of the photos and family documents, and you have a personal interest in what you include. We don't have time to go through scanning, cropping, and editing, but that information can all be found online. Images are going to be found in a lot of the same places where you found your historical narrative. So when you're looking for historical narrative, look for images at the same time. You want people, you want places. You can even have images of inanimate objects if there was a special treasured possession, say, that was used at weddings for multiple generation, a cup or something like that, a handkerchief. Even scans of records you found in your research can be interesting, especially to those young readers, if you have a, a signature on one of the documents. Make sure that the images you choose to use are in the public domain. You can sort by this criteria when you're looking for images online. You may need to pay a fee to get permission to use the image or to get a high resolution file. High resolution is 300 dots per square inch or more. Do not use images without appropriate permission. Even if you're using family photos, make sure that the family members know that you're planning on putting them in your publication. And remember that charts are easy and may be valuable to those young readers. Design is important. Once you've got everything together, you need to decide how you're going to lay out your book. You want it to be readable. You want the margins to be adequate for binding your book, if that's what you're going to do. You are only going to design and lay out your book when the manuscript is edited, complete, and near final. You also want to have all the illustrations in hand. You can do this yourself in MS Word, or you can find a designer to do it for you in Adobe InDesign. Here is a super high level list of design considerations that I also don't have time to go over. But one big thing is don't use any crazy typefaces. It's just, they're too hard to read. All your pages are laid out either by you or by a designer. This is a proofreading checklist that you can go through all of these different pieces to make sure that your book is going to come out in a professional manner that's going to be easy for readers to interact with. This is a list of all the possible front and end matter sections a book can have. The red ones are required. Every publication must have a title page and a copyright page. They should back up to one another, meaning when you turn the title page, the copyright notice should be on the back side. A genealogical publication should have a table of contents, and it must have an index. Your book needs a cover. That's all I'm going to say about this slide because I am running out of time. But the important thing I want to talk about is the next slide. You must have an index. No genealogy is complete without a way to find information inside it. MS Word can do index tagging, but I caution you, we have found our experience to be that it doesn't do a very good job. It's a very specific skill, and you really want to hire a professional indexer. $3.50, $4 per indexable page, and they will serve as a final proofreader, because when they look at your content in this different way, just reading each page and looking at the names, they will undoubtedly find errors that you missed as the person writing it. You were just too close to that content. The key thing about an index is it can only be done once all your content and your page layout are set in stone. If a change has to be made that moves the text from one book page to another, the page numbers in your index will be wrong. And believe me, that is not a pretty situation to be in. When I say all women by all of their names, this is what I mean. The woman will be indexed under her maiden name and her married name and any subsequent married names. Your index has been laid out. Wow, you're getting this done quick. The last section of pages in your book is your index. Any fixable problems have been addressed, and now you're doing the final eyeballing. To do this, you're going to print out your table of contents, check everything against it, make sure that all the pieces match up, and you are good to go. You're at the final step, print or publish. If you've done your own layout, you could print it at home. If you're going to do it on 8.5 by 11 paper, you can also take your book to one of these vendors, a local coffee shop, or maybe a coffee shop, or to a Staples or Office Max store. You can also use a commercial brick and mortar printer. And here we are. We are at the review stage. I don't have anything more to say about this. This is what we all just talked about, and I want to leave time for questions, but I want to give you this last slide. There's your book. Picture that. I hope this introduction to writing and publishing has inspired you to move forward with your book project. We have lots of online resources. You can navigate easily on our American Ancestors website and get all kinds of resources. If you prefer print resources, we got them too. These are the items that I have referred to a couple of times, our guide to genealogical writing, and these individual 4-page laminated coffee-resistant portable genealogists are also a set of writing portable genealogist information that you will refer to time and again. I still look at the editorial style sheet one to double check the state abbreviations. And that is all I have time to say. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And I
Well,
urge you, well, I'm
go
just going to
ahead.
say, I urge you to sign up for that 5-week course, because we can give you so much more detail, because this is a huge undertaking. Thanks.
Yes, and that's a great segue and a great testimonial. Before we get to everyone's questions, and we're at time, but we can stay on for another 10 minutes or so and answer some questions. But before we do, I do want to invite you to a few upcoming programs. And of course, as Sharon just mentioned, if you want to make your dream a reality and write your family history for future generations of family and family historians, be sure to join Sharon and other publishing experts from American Ancestors for our 5-session in-depth online course on writing and publishing your family history, which starts December 2nd, and you can register on americanancestors.org/events. Also in December, our experts will be holding a 3-day virtual workshop on verifying your family tree, helping you to determine the accuracy of your conclusions and take your research even further. That program includes small group lectures and demonstrations, as well as one-on-one consultations with our experts. So you can really get some hands-on help with your projects. And then on December 19th, Rhonda McClure will be leading a free webinar on how to avoid common family history pitfalls and myths. And if you are new to family history or want to beef up your skills or maybe refresh your skills, join us in the new year for a 5-week online course on getting started in family history research. And again, you can learn more about these and all of our events at americanancestors.org/events. All right, so let's get to some questions. I love this question because I think we all struggle with this. Gary says, I really like doing research and following up on all the blanks to solve the mystery. I have even created a rough outline, but I just can't seem to get started on putting all this down onto paper. Any suggestions? So going back all the way to that first, I think that first step where you're switching mental gears. Any suggestions, Sharon?
Well, Gary, I've never written my family history because I guess I'm too busy writing other people's. Um, I guess you have to ask yourself, where is the stopping point? And if you're having a hard time seeing that stopping point, you're going to have to just create one. If you really want to write and publish, then I guess another question would be, do you really want to? Maybe you could give it over to someone else who might enjoy writing and publishing it, and you could just review it. Not everybody is a writer. Some people are better at researching. Some people, like myself, are better at editing. So, you got to ask yourself some hard questions, I guess, and try to dig deeper and see what's holding you back.
Yeah, and Michael says, I have heard some writers say it's good to start writing before all the research is complete because it helps you to identify holes, things you still need to run down. And I think that that's true for some of our researchers and writers on our team as well. They are researching and writing at the same time. So that's certainly a possibility. And then also,
Hmm.
I think, Sharon, you noted if there are things that you need to come back to, just write a note to yourself in the manuscript and come back to it at a later date. So, and the idea that research is ever complete, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's possible. There's always more to find, right? But
Right,
I
right.
think you just need to kind of take that first step. It's a big first step, and make the shift and start writing.
I would say to Gary, um, pick the family that you're most interested in. Maybe that will help motivate you, or that you feel is most complete, and just start with that as sort of a trial run.
Right. And Sharon, you also mentioned kind of taking bite-sized chunks,
Hmm.
so making a scope that's more doable. Or maybe it's an article. Maybe you just get your feet wet writing an article.
Yep.
We've had a few questions about kind of the automatic publishing features on, Family Tree Maker, Ancestry, I think other either online or desktop tree software programs. Is it advised to kind of run a report and edit that and use that as your manuscript, or do you really suggest starting from scratch?
That slide was in there and I cut it out because I knew that this was running long. Um, I think that the best thing you can do with something generated from your tree software is to print it and look at it, but you're not going to get a book out of that. It's how it's put together is not going to create something that's particularly readable. I think you could use that as a base. You could either try to pour that into a registered template, or you could have it next to and cut and paste things from it as you work in your registered template. I don't think you really should depend on it as the only way of going about moving forward with your writing, though.
Um, there were also some questions about organizing information for women. This is a common question as well. So you mentioned organizing your materials, whether they are digital files or paper files, using the individual's name. Do you recommend organizing those by the woman's maiden name or married name?
What I did in my own research, I mean, the I have stuff. I have never moved forward to write using that stuff, but I do have some lovely boxes right here above my head where I have file folders, and inside that file folder, I keep the person under their parents until they marry, or until they reach adulthood, kind of the middle part of their life. That's what I've done. So I have a folder for my grandfather, and then my grandmother, her early part of her life is sort of with her parents, but then once she's married to my grandfather, I have her information in a folder that sits alongside his folder. I'm not sure whether that's the right way to do it, but it's the way that made sense to me. And what I would say is whatever makes sense to you, stick with that, because you don't want to start doing different things in different families and different generations, because that could become very hard to track down your materials.
We also have several questions about copyright. First
Hmm.
of all, items that are in your family's possessions from, the 19th century, do you need any kind of copyright clearance for those?
It depends on what kind of items they are. Um,
Photographs.
Okay, okay. I mean, technically, anything that was taken by a professional photographer, that photographer owns copyright. Um, at this point in time, if this is a photograph that was taken in, 1906, that photographer is deceased. And to try to figure out whether he passed on the rights to his work to his heirs would be pretty difficult. I think the best thing that you can do is to err on the side of caution. And if you know the photographer, like I have a very famous family photo, and I know that it was taken by Byers, a photographer who worked in Telluride, Colorado, and I would cite him, that photography studio, and give the year, so that if someone wanted to figure out where this photo came from, they could track it down. But I don't think that you would be responsible for something like that, even though it was a professional photographer, after all these years.
And then questions about who owns the copyright of your book and how do you go about securing that copyright?
If you put your name on the copyright page, if it says copyright 2024 Sharon Ingles, then I own copyright. Um, if you're publishing with a publishing vendor, they don't they shouldn't have, I would think, any interest in having rights to your family history. You should have copyright. It's your history and you did the writing. Um, the only thing you really technically have to do is have a copyright page and state that copyright, the year, and your name. You can also, as we do in our publishing program, we send a copy of all of our books to the Library of Congress, but that isn't required to get copyright protection.
And maybe somewhat related, folks have asked about getting an ISBN. Is that necessary?
Um, I copyright law can change, and I am not an attorney. I would check online to see what the current thinking is on that. Um, I don't think an ISBN is necessary, but I wouldn't want to say that conclusively, because I don't have training in that area.
Um, let's see, lots of great questions. I'm s- Cheryl says, I'm struggling with a massive volume of citations. Any tips?
You mean you just have so many citations that you don't
So
know
many
what to do with them?
citations. Well, I could see, and uh, I've certainly read genealogies where it seems like, two-thirds of the page is just footnotes. So if you're, if that, which doesn't make for great reading, especially if your audience is, say, your family, any suggestions on different ways to handle citations? I mean, in that instance, would endnotes be better? Would you suggest combining citations? I know we talk a lot about citations in the 5-week course, but if you could maybe give some tips here.
Hmm. Yeah, I would say that yes, sometimes the sources do end up taking up half the page, which is a particular problem um, if you also want to put images on the page. So in books where we want to have the images, the illustrations sort of flowing right along with the text, we usually keep the footnotes in the manuscript file, but once we turn it into pages we use InDesign, we have a professional designer who lays out our books. Um, we take those footnotes and we move them to the end and have them as endnotes so they're not sort of competing with um, for the attention of the reader. The other thing you can make sure you do is if there are sources that you're going to cite over and over again, make sure to establish, and I didn't have time to talk about this today, but make sure you establish a short citation for that. So if it's the ancestors of Joe Schmo who came to New Jersey in the 14th century. Okay, that doesn't make any sense, sorry, but you get the gist. Then you're gonna have this book written by Schmo, and you're going to shorten the title, and you're going to use a short citation for that book every time you talk about it after the first time where you give the full citation. That will save space because the full citation needs the publication year and the publisher info, but each time you cite it thereafter, the short cite only needs the last name of the author and a shortened version of the book's title. Of course, you still need to have the page numbers, but that cuts down on the length of the citations quite a bit. Um, those would be, I mean, you have to have a citation for every piece of information. So if you have a lot of information, there's no way around having a lot of citations, but those are a couple of ways that you can manage how they appear in your book.
We've also had several questions about how do you handle maybe more sensitive topics, family secrets. Um, do you include that? Do you include living people? Um,
Yeah,
any
I saw
suggestions?
I had a question come through from member services about how do you handle living people. And I think what I mentioned in this lecture today was that you probably have to have them fill out a questionnaire, or if you can be in touch with them and get their information, because you're not going to have access to it in public records. Um, I think one of the things about family history is that you should be, like with copyright and ownership of property, you should be courteous. Always do the polite thing, the way treat others as you want to be treated. So if it turns out in your research that you've discovered that there was a extramarital dalliance that produced a child, I think you should probably make sure that that family is aware and ask how they feel about you including it. If you want to include it because it's a fact, have them review what you're going to write about it and be comfortable with how it's presented in your book. The worst thing is to have the book come out, or the family reunion, God forbid, and you pass out your booklet to everyone and it looks beautiful and someone opens it up and is very upset and runs off in tears because their family secret was revealed right there in front of everyone else. Um, so it's, being sensitive and being courteous and just careful about how you word things, I think is the way to go.
Great, thank you. Um, Final question. Uh, Several people have also asked, well, I'm gonna do two last questions. This is this is the second
I'm
to
not
last.
going anywhere,
This is
Ginevra.
this is the second to last. A few people have asked about what do you do once the book is published? I mean,
I think
Do
you'd go on a
American ants
really,
yeah,
really
do
long
American
trip.
a vacation. Yeah, after that, you need to just breathe. But do local historical societies, genealogical society, does American Ancestors accept published volumes for its collection?
I I I mean, we usually send our books to the historical society or the any library that, say, a university library that played a big part in the lives of the people who are in the book. I would say that any library, in my opinion, would be crazy to turn down anything, right? Because if you send them your book and put a letter and say, "I wrote this book," and this your area of the country is mentioned in it, my ancestors lived there for 3 generations, um I think they would be very, very happy to receive it. I'm not sure you'd get a response saying thank you, but I think you should go ahead, and the point of writing about genealogy is to share it. So get it out there, put it in the libraries, look through your index and see, like, what places are mentioned, where should I send this to. um, Definitely. And one thing I should mention is, if you get content like a photo, that may be a requirement in order to use a certain photo that is a third party, someone else's property. You may have to send them a book showing how you used it in their book. So that's another case of when you will be sending your publication out to others.
And we love receiving copies of books that people have written,
Yep.
your family history. So certainly consider us on that list if you once you complete your book and you want it out in the world, we'd love to receive it. But just think about who's using it. And I have to say, an index goes a long way.
Oh, yes. That's
Um,
one of the most common questions that we used to get was, is my ancestor in this new book that you guys just published? So we would go to the shelf, pick up the book, open up the index. Any genealogy has to have an index.
Final question.
Hmm.
Um, is it worth it? This was a good question. Is it worth it to write a family history book? And I mean, I think that's, your own decision, but um, and I know what you're gonna say, Sharon, but worth
Nah.
asking.
Um, yes. I mean, I think it's definitely, if you're here spending an hour plus listening to me talk about this, it's definitely worth it for you. And your family members are going to enjoy it. And you're going to enjoy opening up that book and looking at it and saying, "My goodness, I did this." You're going to feel proud of it, and you should feel proud of it. I feel proud of every single book that I've ever published, and I've lost count how many I have published, but I have, I get a certain sense of pride and satisfaction when I pull out a book and I flip through it and I remember what we went through to get that book to the printer. It is definitely worth it. There's so much information online, and you can put your publication online, and that's also worth it. But to have a physical book, whether it's a little paperback that you got done at Office Max or whatever, to have that is it's really meaningful, and it's a huge accomplishment.
Well, thank you again, Sharon, and thank you everyone for your great questions. I know we didn't get to everyone's question. Of course, definitely consider either purchasing the syllabus that has more information that goes over just about everything that we covered today. There's also a recording that will be made available on our website as well as our YouTube channel that's freely available. And then if you'd like to take the next step and go even deeper down the rabbit hole and want to join us for the 5-week December course, Sharon and I are hope to see you there. Um, but thank you again for joining us. And as you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. This free webinar was made possible by the generous support of members and friends around the world. Please consider making a gift to American Ancestors to keep these programs free and to create more free programs for you and for others. I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.